The ring of keys felt heavier than usual in my palm, though there were only two of them. One for the ignition, one for the trunk. My boss leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and smirked like she'd just won a game no one else knew they were playing. "You should have stuck with me, you clown," she said, snatching the keys from my hand, as if she were taking candy from a child. The words echoed in the stale office air, bouncing off beige walls and framed motivational posters that had long since lost their meaning. I stood there a moment, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I had already decided not to say it. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm 41 years old, and until that afternoon, I served as senior operations manager at a mid-sized logistics company called Redline Freight Systems. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, or so I thought. For 12 years, I optimized routes, negotiated with suppliers, and kept trucks moving across state lines, while she collected the praise upstairs. 12 years of my life poured into an engine she pretended to drive. She never gave me a raise. Not once. Every annual review, I'd walk into her office with metrics in hand, cost reductions, delivery speed improvements, driver retention numbers that outshined the industry standard. She'd nod, feign interest, then close her folder and deliver the same rehearsed line. "This year's budget is tight, Marcus. Let's revisit it next year." Next year always looked exactly like the last. But I swallowed it. I told myself loyalty mattered, that stability had its own value, that maybe, if I just kept my head down, I'd finally get the respect I'd earned. Instead, I got fired. Not because I failed, but because I dared to apply somewhere else. I'd kept it discreet, or so I thought, but somehow the whisper reached her desk. And in her mind, loyalty wasn't something to reward. It was something to weaponize. She called me in, slid a pink slip across her desk, and smiled as if she were doing me a favor. "I don't need someone with wandering eyes," she said. "This company deserves commitment." That's when she held out her hand for the keys. The company car wasn't luxury, just a black sedan with decent mileage. But it had become part of my identity. It was mine to fuel, mine to keep polished, mine to drive across endless highways at 2 a.m. when a shipment went sideways. She took it like she was stripping me of rank. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't even flinch when she twisted the knife, leaning forward with that sneer. "You should have stuck with me." I just smiled, a small, polite curve of the lips, the kind that says nothing and everything all at once. Then I wished her good luck and walked out quietly, the sound of my footsteps muffled against the corporate carpet. But silence isn't surrender. Not for me. She thought she was cutting ties with a disposable employee, but she never understood what I really was. I wasn't just the guy who made schedules and filed reports. I was the one who kept the gears from locking up. I knew every vendor relationship, every fragile contract clause, every shortcut buried in the system that only I could see. She thought she held the map. She didn't know I was the cartographer. And as I stepped out into the parking lot, sun burning the hood of my suddenly unfamiliar car, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not fear, clarity, the kind that sharpens edges and burns away excuses. For too long, I had let her dangle my worth like bait, convincing me to wait just one more year. But the leash snapped the moment she called me a clown. She thought those words were final. They were just the beginning. I didn't slam the door behind me. I didn't make a scene. I walked with the calm of a man who already knew the ending. And in that calm, there was a promise forming, quiet but unshakable. 5 days later, she got a surprise she never saw coming. I used to think redline freight systems would be my last stop, a place to settle in, put down roots, and let my work speak for itself. When I joined, the company was a mess. Lost shipments, double-booked drivers, suppliers walking away after unpaid invoices. Trucks sat idle, while clients screamed for deliveries. I came in as a mid-level coordinator. Nothing fancy, but I couldn't stomach the chaos. I mapped every route by hand, learned the quirks of each driver, built spreadsheets when the system crashed, and created a structure no one else could see. What started as survival became a machine, one I built gear by gear. And when it finally ran smooth, she stood in front of investors and claimed she had engineered the turnaround. Her name was stamped on every success. She paraded quarterly reports as though she had pulled the levers herself. But the truth was simpler. She couldn't tell the difference between a fuel surcharge and a mileage deduction. Without me, she was blind. Without me, every wheel stopped turning. I was the one who handled the late-night vendor calls, who renegotiated fragile contracts to keep us afloat, who kept drivers loyal by making sure their paychecks landed on time, even when corporate dragged its feet. I was the invisible scaffolding. She was the paint on the wall. It might have been tolerable if she had acknowledged it in private. A quiet nod, a rare thank you, even a moment of sincerity might have eased the sting. But she wore my work like armor, using it to deflect criticism and elevate her own image. And every time I walked into her office, with another problem solved, another fire extinguished, she smiled like she had expected it all along, as if my effort was nothing more than the natural order of things. I didn't complain. I told myself it was part of the job. I told myself loyalty mattered, that if I just kept steady, the years of sacrifice would eventually pay dividends. But loyalty is a coin that only buys value when both sides honor it. She spent mine like it was counterfeit. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, funerals. I once skipped my own brother's wedding because a critical shipment out of Dallas had gone sideways. I sat in a silent office at midnight while my family danced, because she said she needed me. And I believed her. Now, standing on the outside, I see the threads differently. She doesn't know the weak points in the system the way I do. She doesn't know which clients can be spooked by a late delivery, which vendors are already suspicious of her delays in payment, which contracts are balanced on loopholes she's too careless to notice. That ignorance is her comfort. My knowledge is the blade pressed quietly against it. So I watch. I don't storm the gates or announce my intentions. That isn't how you dismantle an empire. You don't break it with noise. You let the silence do the work. Vendors talk. Clients whisper. Emails reveal themselves in the metadata she never thinks to scrub. A missed deadline here, an overconfident promise there. Patterns emerge like cracks in plaster. She doesn't even realize the fractures are already spreading under her feet. I drive past the office some nights and see her light on. I know what she's doing. Pacing, drafting emails, trying to keep her grip on a system she never built. I don't need to be inside to read the desperation. I still know the rhythms, the quarter-end pressures, the peaks when vendors expect payment, the valleys when clients grow restless. She's predictable. Predictability is the first weakness of every arrogant commander. The betrayal burns, but not the way it once did. It's no longer raw. It's something colder now, sharper, honed by reflection. She thought firing me cut me out of the picture. In reality, it freed me to see it more clearly. I can trace every line of the structure I built. Every joint she doesn't know is loose. Every bolt she doesn't know is rusted. She thinks she holds the steering wheel. She doesn't even know the engine is failing. I'm not rushing. I'm not panicking. I've learned enough to understand the first rule of survival: patience. Let them talk. Let them think. Let them hang themselves with their own rope. It started small, the way most fractures do. Hairline, almost invisible. I made a few calls. Nothing overt, nothing that could be traced. Just conversations that seemed casual. A check-in with an old vendor I knew personally. A reminder to a client about a late delivery they hadn't yet noticed. Words dropped like stones into a still pond, each ripple subtle, each one widening into cracks she couldn't patch. By the end of the week, I heard whispers echoing back through channels she never controlled. They weren't asking about redline freight systems. They were asking about her. I knew her weaknesses because I built the foundation she stood on. I knew which suppliers operated on thin margins, which ones needed their invoices cleared within 48 hours to keep their own doors open. A single late payment could tip them into anger or fear, and once fear entered the conversation, it always spread. So I made sure the reminders surfaced in the right places at the right time. A polite vendor asking why their invoice hadn't cleared. A client questioning a delay in paperwork. Nothing dramatic, nothing explosive, just enough to put her on edge. When the first deal collapsed, I wasn't surprised. She had overpromised to a regional retailer, guaranteeing delivery dates she couldn't possibly control. Normally, I would have intercepted the agreement, rewritten the terms, and smoothed the edges before anyone noticed. But I wasn't there anymore. She stood exposed, her signature the only shield. The retailer pulled out, citing confidence concerns. Those words travel faster than any shipment. That night, I remembered the way she used to speak to me in meetings, as if my presence was nothing more than an afterthought. "You're replaceable, Marcus," she once told me, voice sharp enough to slice through a room full of silence. "Be grateful you even have a job." I kept my face still when she said it, but the words lodged in me like shrapnel. For years, I carried that weight, convincing myself I could outwork her contempt. Now, those same words fueled every step I took. Replaceable? She was about to learn what irreplaceable really looked like. I didn't go for the kill yet. That wasn't the plan. Collapse isn't satisfying when it happens too quickly. It needs to build, to tighten around the throat slowly enough that the victim realizes too late there's no escape. She had to feel the walls closing in, inch by inch, until the light above her was just a sliver. Only then would the final strike matter. So I held back, even as the signs multiplied. A supplier pulled out without explanation. A driver called me off the record, asking if I'd heard why paychecks were late. I hadn't planted those problems, not directly. All I did was make sure the silence around them grew louder, make sure no one stepped in to soothe them. Without me to smooth the gears, the machine rattled on its own, and she didn't have the tools, or the humility, to fix it. She tried to maintain her swagger, of course. That was her weapon, her mask. She strode into meetings with her head high, lips curled into that same smirk she wore when she took my keys. But I was watching, and I knew the difference between confidence and desperation. Her smile was thinner now. Her words rushed, sharp at the edges. When she laughed, it carried a tremor. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. I sat 2 tables away at a crowded bar, a place where deals often began and ended. She didn't see me. Why would she? I was supposed to be gone, erased, the dead weight she had finally cut free. She leaned across to a man in a gray suit, glass of wine in her hand, and said it loud enough to slice through the hum of conversation. "Best decision I ever made was getting rid of Marcus. The guy was dead weight. I'm finally free of his constant complaining. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just let my phone record, the red light hidden under the table. Her laughter followed, sharp and hollow. She thought she was untouchable. She had no idea the walls were already cracking. It didn't take long before the whispers in the hallways of Redline turned into something sharper. Clients who once trusted her word started circling back with pointed questions. Vendors demanded explanations for late payments that couldn't be brushed off with charm. Even the drivers, men and women who usually kept their heads down and their mouths shut, began asking why their overtime wasn't showing up on paychecks. The system I once held together was grinding without oil, and every squeak echoed louder than she realized. I didn't need to push hard. I just had to give gravity a little nudge. A spreadsheet, accidentally, forwarded to a client that highlighted discrepancies between billed hours and actual deliveries. A supplier who received a polite but anonymous note reminding them to double-check their contract terms. A compliance auditor tipped off to look a little closer at the quarterly filings. Each move quiet, indirect, impossible to trace back to me. She walked into them one by one, convinced the world was conspiring against her. The beauty of arrogance is how it blinds the arrogant. Instead of addressing the problems, she mocked me in my absence. I heard it through a former coworker, who still slipped me updates now and then. Marcus thinks he mattered, she told the staff during a tense meeting. He was a glorified clipboard. I built this company, and I'll keep it standing without him. They laughed on the surface, but I knew better. Fear doesn't laugh convincingly. Doubt doesn't hide well. Every insult she threw at me only deepened the cracks beneath her. The financial irregularities grew harder to ignore. I made sure of it. A payment she thought was processed hung in limbo because the system suddenly flagged it for review. An investor asked for documentation she couldn't provide, the very kind of files I once organized down to the last detail. Even the bank hesitated on a credit extension, wary of the late invoices piling up. I wasn't sabotaging her with brute force. I was just rearranging the mirrors so she saw herself for what she really was. Unprepared, exposed, hollow. And she felt it. I could see it in the small ways. The emails she sent to clients, once crisp and confident, now rambled in circles, defensive without reason. The phone calls grew longer, her tone shifting from casual command to brittle pleading. She started arriving at the office earlier, leaving later, as if sheer presence could compensate for incompetence. But paranoia doesn't hide behind long hours. It seeps into the eyes, into the twitch of a hand gripping a coffee cup too tightly. She knew something was wrong. She just couldn't name it. Her allies began to falter. A senior account manager quietly updated his resume. A vendor she'd leaned on for years started asking about alternate points of contact. Investors who once praised her decisiveness now whispered about her recklessness. She felt the tide turning, and like most who sense power slipping, she clutched tighter. Arrogance became desperation, and desperation always makes people sloppy. I could have ended it then. I had enough to bury her. Emails, discrepancies, recordings of her drunken boasts about cutting corners. But ending it in silence wasn't enough. She fired me in front of an office full of eyes. She mocked me as a clown, a man easily discarded. Her fall needed to be just as public, just as undeniable, carved into the memory of everyone who once laughed at her jokes. So I waited. I let the tension rise, let her empire sway, like a tower built on rotting beams. Every day she stayed in power, the collapse grew larger. Every mistake she made in panic widened the blast radius. When it came down, I wanted the impact to reach every corner of her carefully staged kingdom. The net was ready now. All that remained was one pull, one undeniable piece of evidence that would unravel everything she had stitched together. I had it prepared, sealed tight, impossible to refute. It was already in motion, ticking quietly in the background like a timed charge. Soon, she would learn what it meant to be truly replaceable. The morning of the board meeting, the air inside Redline Freight Systems felt heavier than the glass doors could contain. I walked through the lobby like a ghost, returning to its haunt. Unnoticed at first, until a few employees spotted me and froze. Some looked away quickly, others whispered my name as though it were forbidden. I didn't need their greetings. I was here for something else entirely. The boardroom sat at the top floor, glass walls overlooking the city, long table polished to a shine. Around it, investors and executives fidgeted with tablets and notebooks, their voices clipped, expectant. At the head of the table sat her, my former boss, dressed in her usual armor of confidence, a navy blazer and a smile sharpened into a blade. She welcomed them with the same voice she'd always used, pretending the cracks in her empire were just rumors, insisting the turbulence was temporary. Then, I stepped in. The room hushed like a switch had been flipped. She blinked at me, momentarily stunned, then leaned back in her chair, as if my presence was beneath her notice. "What's he doing here?" she asked, feigning amusement. "Didn't I fire you, Marcus?" I placed a folder on the table and slid it forward. "You tried," I said. My voice was steady, not loud, not angry, just steady, the kind of tone that cuts deeper than shouting. The investors leaned in, curiosity outweighing her protests. I opened the folder and revealed what I'd been building for weeks. Emails detailing her manipulations, invoices paid twice over, client contracts altered without signatures. I had bank statements flagged by compliance auditors, recordings of her calling me dead weight, while bragging about falsifying delivery logs to pad quarterly numbers. Every piece lined up with surgical precision, impossible to dismiss as coincidence. She snatched a paper from the stack and laughed, but the sound cracked halfway through. "This is nonsense. Fabricated. He's bitter. That's all." One of the investors, an older man with steel-gray hair, adjusted his glasses and read through the documents. His jaw tightened. "These are authentic," he said quietly, "and they're damning." The others followed, their murmurs swelling into a tide she couldn't control. She stood pacing, her smile breaking at the edges. "You can't trust him. He's a disgruntled employee. He's nothing without me." That word again. Nothing. For years, she used it like a leash. But today, it snapped. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. The papers, the recordings, the accounts, they spoke louder than I ever could. Every lie she'd told, every corner she'd cut, every insult she'd thrown, was now laid bare in front of the very people she needed to believe in her. And belief drained from their faces faster than blood from a wound. Her phone buzzed on the table. She grabbed it, glanced at the screen, and I saw the panic set in. News had already broken, an anonymous tip delivered to a journalist hours earlier. Headlines would be rolling out now, each one carving away what little remained of her reputation. The board members shifted uncomfortably, some already gathering their things, others dialing contacts. One by one, her allies became ghosts. She looked at me then, truly looked, and for the first time her eyes weren't sharp or mocking. They were wide, unsteady, grasping for control she no longer held. "You did this," she whispered. I held her gaze, calm as ever. "No, you did this. I just kept the receipts." The meeting ended not with a vote, not with ceremony, but with silence. Investors walked out, shaking their heads, Legal counsel stepped in, voices clipped, already discussing charges and liabilities. She sat alone at the head of the table, hands trembling as the empire she'd built on arrogance collapsed beneath her. I gathered my folder and turned to leave. Just before I reached the door, I stopped and let my final words cut through the heavy air. She thought she fired me. She didn't realize I was already writing her resignation letter. And then I walked away, leaving her to the ruins.